This summer, the harmonious sounds of a brand new opera will ring through the North Country. The story has characters who would spend summers in the early 1900s in the Adirondacks. True events were fictionalized and musicalized this century, again in the Adirondacks. Here to tell us about the world premiere production is artistic director Darren Woods of Seagle Festival, the company that will premiere this opera. Hello, Darren.
Hey, Paul, it's good to see you.
It's very nice to see you. How did it happen that Seagle Festival has the honor of producing this new opera?
Well, it was the stars just aligned. When I moved here permanently back in 2017, I got a list of important people that I should meet. And so one of them was Russell Banks, and it said in parentheses, I think he wrote an opera libretto. So I quickly got on the phone. I cold called Russell Banks out of the blue and said, tell me about this libretto. And then I remembered that I had heard two excerpts like 15 years before at New York City Opera. So I asked him to coffee. He told me the story of the opera. I said, if you guys will finish it, I will produce it in 2020. We all knew what happened last year. So now we're producing it in 2021.
I find that so interesting that this opera sat unfinished for more than 15 years and then you gave them a nudge. Now, the characters in this opera include the author Mark Twain, who wrote The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, composer Charles Ives, and his fiancée Harmony Twitchell. Please tell us, who are Charles Ives and Harmony Twitchell?
Charles Ives was one of our first really recognized real American composers, born in the late 19th century and died in the mid 20th century in the 1950s. He really loved bands and American folk songs. And so a lot of his music has a lot of folk song idioms, hymn tunes in it. But he was a really famous composer. Harmony Twitchell was a beautiful oldest child of Reverend Joseph Twitchell and his wife Julia. She was the oldest of 9, and she was a Connecticut lady who vacationed in the Adirondacks every summer in their summer home.
What is the story of this opera?
The story of the opera is really a romantic comedy. Charles Ives goes to ask for Harmony's hand in marriage. Reverend Twitchell, because she is his favorite child, does not trust himself to do the interview with Ives, so he sends Mark Twain to do it. It takes place over a piano duel, and it doesn't go very well. In fact, Mark Twain is in a kind of a bad mood because his wife has just died, and he goes and tells Reverend Twitchell that he doesn't think this is a very good idea. Mayhem ensues. Everybody's mad at each other. But in the end, Twain goes to Ives and says, you're a good guy. It's going to be a great marriage. Please, let's all just get together. So they all get together and sing a big number, the end.
And how does Mark Twain know this family?
Interesting, he was a really close friend of the Twitchell family. In fact, most every summer he visited the Twitchells for a time. It was known that when they would go on hikes, he liked to stay back and smoke his cigars, but he did come every summer to visit them.
This story is all set to music by composer Robert Carl. What is your opinion of his music?
Well, I love Robert's music, and he's an Ives scholar, so there's a lots of Ives coloration in the music. There's a lot of band influence, but he also has a sort of a transcendental side. So there's a gentleness to the music as well. I think audiences are really going to love the piece.
And in addition to this beautiful music, the opera has words that are sung through a plot. And as you mentioned before, they come courtesy of author Russell Banks, who lives in the Adirondacks. How exactly did he get involved?
Another one of those stars aligning, Paul, just perfectly aligning. Robert was reading Russell's novel, The Rule of the Bone, and in it, the character Bone, which is a modern telling of Huckleberry Finn, trashes an Adirondack house and takes the CDs away to Jamaica, and he starts listening to them, and they're all Charles Ives. Well, immediately, Robert goes, Russell Banks must know something about Ives. He obviously knows something about Twain, and he'd been planning on doing a piece on this anyway. Robert called Russell out of the blue, just like I did, and said, I've got this idea for an opera. Do you want to work with it on me? And Russell said, yes. And that's how it happened.
Joining our conversation now is author Russell Banks, who has written novels, poetry, and now his first opera. Hello, Russell.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm glad you've joined us, Russell. You've written successful novels and short stories. Did you ever imagine your career would lead you to write an opera?
No, not at all, actually. It's a complete surprise. Came out of the blue, invitation from the composer Robert Carl to develop an essay I had written about Mark Twain and Charles Ives and my father-in-law's father, my wife's great grandfather, actually, Reverend Twitchell. And it was an intimidating and unexpected invitation, in fact.
So you actually have a family connection to the people that you're writing about in this opera.
Yes, my wife's great grandfather was Reverend Joseph Twitchell, and he was also Mark Twain's lifelong best friend. And he was also, as it turned out, the father-in-law of the composer Charles Ives. So there was a family story about the relationship between these three men, the Reverend, the author, and the composer, that absolutely fascinated me.
And I imagine the creation of the piece is a fascinating process. How is writing the libretto of an opera different from any other kind of writing that you do?
Well, it's wildly different. It actually, in some ways, it's closer to screenwriting, which I have done. Screenwriting in verse, actually, though, and rather than simple dialogue. So it combined my love of poetry and the fact that I had written poetry quite extensively when I was younger, and published a few books of it, and my screenwriting experience. I mean, fiction writing is a completely solitary activity, whereas this, like screenwriting, was collaborative. It was really, it opened up a whole new way of working and thinking for me.
Well, with your screenwriting experience and your poetry and the fact that you have a personal connection to the story and your lifelong love of the Adirondacks, you are really the ideal person to write this opera. How much does it mean to you that the opera story is set in Keene Valley?
Well, it means a lot. I've lived here since 1987, and I fell in love with the place immediately in a very intense way. Um, Maybe vicariously through my wife's long family connection to the area. But I fell in love with the geography. I fell in love with the history. Became obsessed with it, in fact, and started writing about it. I fell in love with the people, and so that this story unfolds here is very important to me. It's so easy and engaging for me to imagine it happening here, even though, in fact, the night that Mark Twain interviewed Charles Ives to see if he was fit for the hand of Reverend Twitchell's favorite daughter, Harmony, actually took place in Hartford, Connecticut. But I moved it to Keene Valley in a way so I could participate more intimately with it.
Oh, that's interesting. But this story could have taken place in Keene Valley, is that correct?
Oh, it did, because Twain and Ives did visit the Twitchells, who had a summer place here, and for generations the Twitchells have come here to Keene and Keene Valley. So and they visited them here and were frequently here, and both of them were quite taken with the region and the village and the people here.
That's incredible that you took that dramatic license and really made it centered in the Adirondacks. How else do you personally relate to the story of this opera?
It's a lovely story to me about an older man, Mark Twain, slightly embittered and saddened by the death of his wife and by the death of two of his children, being in a way enlivened and having his idealism and his optimism renovated and brought back by a young man's idealism and a young man's enthusiasm for the beginning of a love life and the beginning of a marriage. So it's personally, I'm more like the old man in some ways, but age-wise certainly, and I love the engagement with the younger person, and the charge and the recharging that comes from that, or can come from that.
And Darren, you must be pretty charged too, because Seagle Festival is producing the world premiere of this opera with your own emerging artists, the young singers who were selected to attend a session at Seagle this summer. Why is this significant for an opera that is set in the Adirondacks?
Well, for the young artists, the emerging artists, it's significant to them because they are actually learning and singing a role that no one else in the world has ever sung. So they can't watch a YouTube video. They've really got to research it, learn it, and know that they're the first people that are ever going to sing these notes and say these words in public. What's important in the Adirondacks and the opera set in the Adirondacks is there are a lot of people up here who, because they know Russell and love Russell, are going to see an opera for the first time. And so they'll be coming to Seagle either in person or online and receiving the story about our beautiful area and our beautiful mountains. And again, this is going to be recorded so people all over the world may one day see it. But I think if you take both of those elements together, it's the fact that we're finally going to be sharing in the theater again. People are going to be sitting in the audience shoulder to shoulder, and these singers, these young, beautiful singers, are going to be giving their gifts in person, live, something we haven't seen in over a year and a half. And when I tell you how emotional those rehearsals are and just receiving that music, I can only imagine what it's going to be like with the theaters filled and we all once again return to what we so deeply love.
I'd like to thank you, Darren and Russell, for letting us know about this work that really is a gift to the Adirondacks, and hopefully the world at large will embrace it as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
You have 2 chances to experience the opera Harmony live from the Adirondacks. Book your tickets online to see the show in person. Performances will be held at the Oscar Seagle Memorial Theater in Schroon Lake, New York. The opera begins at 7:30 p.m. on August 14th and August 20th. Or if you'd rather view the show from home, you may book tickets for the live streaming events. We have a ticket link for you at mountainlake.org.
Spotlight is supported by the Glenn and Carol Pearsall Adirondack Foundation, dedicated to improving the quality of life for year-round residents of the Adirondack Park.